Hey everyone, it's Lisa Sweeney here from Business in Heels, and I'm so excited. This week I'm joined by Bianca Hartge-Hazelman, who was the winner for the CEO board category at the Gender Equity Awards. So she's got so much great stuff to share. Welcome, Bianca.
Lovely to be here, and I'm really excited to be joining you from my very luxurious uh, virtual background.
We love that too. Bianca, you and I have chatted many times because we actually love what you do with Financy and Impactor. Bianca, you're a strong gender equity advocate. So why don't you share with us some of your story that's led you to be so passionate about gender equity?
Yeah, thank you. I suppose for me, it started from. I've got three girls, and it was something that started when they were little, really, and but I think even before that, it's like what happens to many of us the moment you have children, the workforce dynamics start to change a little bit. And I distinctly remember I had booked my eldest now, who's 11, in for childcare from 3 months of age. So that was my plan. That's what I thought I would be comfortable doing. And I was ready for that. But suddenly, when I had this little person, I didn't want to do that full time and get straight back to work in that capacity, although I did go back full time. But I was able to work from home. So there were different things that suddenly made me feel differently. And this
Mm.
awareness is really what started me thinking about. So if I take this time out of work, what happens? What happens to my finances? What happens to my life? How am I exposed if something goes wrong in my relationship? All these kind of things. And that's really where it started for me, and thinking and having these conversations with other women continuously as a journalist, researching and digging deeper, and discovering my inner feminist more. And those things take you on a journey of reflection and being aware of where you are right now. And I think three girls later, well, two girls later, I have got three. I really am quite passionate about how do we drive change for future generations? How do we do our best to have it all, even though when you feel like you're at absolute capacity, how can we do better for women, for better for girls, and ultimately better for men as a result, and little boys. So that's what I'm all about, is looking at data, researching, trying to uncover stories and find and think of ways in a holistic sense that collectively businesses and individuals can do better on the gender equity front.
So tell us a little bit about Financy, which is the report that you create, which really does help people get some amazing insights. And maybe you can share with us a couple of the more recent insights that have come out.
Yeah, well, the Financy Women's Index has been going for 7 years. It's a quarterly report, a labor of love. We do have corporate sponsors that thankfully keep us going. But essentially, we've got about 6 economists that review the report each quarter when she comes out. It is a person, this Women's Index, so it's why not talk about her as a she. And it's something that we look at the data on the gender pay gap. We're now at a fresh low in the gender pay gap nationally. When you look at just average full-time weekly wages, that's about 13%. WGEA's data, which looks at a sample of about 4,000 companies, is about 20 odd percent. So it's different, but nationally we're doing not too bad, but we still have a long way to go. We also look at education. So the choices we're making from the moment we leave high school, are those choices marrying up with pay outcomes in the same way they are as men? Well, no, they're not. Why are they not? So we look at that. We look at unpaid work, which for me is the biggest thing, because it blocks your ability to participate from an educational sense, from a employment sense, from the ability to earn more income, and the ability to allow yourself to do more. So we look at those, and super, and of course leadership and employment. Lots goes into it, and we try to pull it all together in about 5 pages these days. I remember when we started, it was a 30 to 40 page report, and we
Wow.
started asking ourselves, who is reading it? And it gets a huge media reach, so we know people are reading it, but uh, it, we just had to condense it. We had economists saying, gee, we don't even produce this amount of work for our market wraps, I think Shane Oliver said that to me. So we started cutting it down and making it as concise as possible to give people a snapshot of how women are progressing and how long it's going to take in years across about 7 indicators till we see parity in Australia.
I can remember actually you shared with us one thing which really stuck with me, and it was all about the super pay gap, and that you'd actually seen in one quarter the gap narrowing, but it actually wasn't because women had got paid more. It was because a whole lot of men had retired and started spending their superannuation, which brought the level down. But it's those insights that are really valuable, because then you can do something about it.
Yeah, it is. And it's those insights that allow us to think, okay, well, we're getting somewhere, but how are we getting there? And is that sustainable? Those kind of things are not. And we don't want to get there because men are suffering and they're losing out on different things.
Mm.
We actually want to get there because we know we're kicking these goals, and
Yep.
we want to see those. But there does have to be the push pull along the way, and that is a constant frequency that we see across all the indicators. And someone said to me, one of the economists that looks at this every quarter said to me, he expects that we'll get there not because women have to reach this level where men are at. That's not really realistic. What we need to do is get to a point where we're here, for example, where we come together. So, and I think we're starting to see that when we look at part-time jobs, for example, we're seeing increases in the number of men working part-time. We are seeing adjustments around wages. We are seeing, and these things are soft, they're softly, like even with the unpaid work dynamics, we're seeing an increase in the number of hours that men spend in unpaid work relative to women. Women still do far more, but we're nonetheless seeing that shift, whereas for women, it's kind of staying the same. So we need to see these little adjustments happen. And I hate that I've used the word little, but because that's what they are, we need to see them at a greater extent in order to drive change faster, that's for sure.
Absolutely. So share with us a little bit about Impactor and what that is doing to help organisations, because I think that's a fabulous tool.
Yeah, thank you. So the Women's Index is really an advocacy media report that goes out. It lets you know where things are at, and it's used and quoted around the place to get a snapshot of gender equity. But what frustrated me doing this report is how can we drive change faster? And so we developed and designed a piece of tech called Impactor that allows businesses to take the lead by measuring their performance across gender, across diversity, so the broad forms, sexual orientation, cultural diversity, ageism, disabilities. So the intersectionality, the layers, if you will, around gender, but beyond that. And really look at those and start to say, well, what changes can I make within the workforce that we know can have an impact, but that can also help improve business performance? Because there's this barrier there still that exists. And we've seen it most recently with Elon Musk in December talking about DEI being dead. So there is still this element of this privilege status that's coming through, that's blocking a lot of the gains. And I think in many ways, this isn't a bad thing, and I'm not fearful of it. It's something that almost forces us to have a bit of a rethink about the approach taken by companies to go forward. And I think the key really is looking at, well, what adjustments can be made that support business performance? And we know that greater gender diversity and cultural diversity, the combination can improve company profitability. We know that we've seen better outcomes from a board leadership perspective as well. And we also know that productivity results from an employee satisfaction and greater innovation. So there are all these things that together are starting to tell a greater story in support of making changes around DEI. And that's what Impact is about allowing businesses to measure and track their changes, but to then look at the business dynamics and say, hey, this is actually doing something that benefits the company bottom line at the same time. So that's what we're focused on. We're in the midst of a capital raise at the moment to launch this to the stratosphere and beyond. but it's exciting, and it's about impact. It's about the driving lasting change for future generations, starting with companies.
Well, what great timing. I mean, given that we're about to hit the reporting of the gender pay gap at the moment, and with all the new psychosocial hazards act coming out, which is very much focused on, making sure work is a safe place for everybody. And if anyone's been watching the Closing the Loopholes, all the bill changes that have been sort of seeming to sneak through in the last week or so, trying to keep on top of all of these things and actually make sure your workforce is happy. I think there
Mm.
was never a better time, Bianca, to get tools out in the hands of people that can really, really use them.
Yeah, I agree, and I think what I love about what we've got with Impactor is it validates the employee experience, and there's nothing else out there that really marries what the business leaders are
Mm,
saying with what the employees are feeling, on the same level. There's certainly lots of different survey things that you can take to design, and create your own outcomes. But this is something we've worked very hard with the University of South Australia to develop, to ensure it's robust and non-biased there, but to actually get that employee feedback so that you can see and look at, as you mentioned, those psycho hazards in the, I've said that wrong, that are within the workforce, the ability to take proactive steps to eliminate those. And it's the same around other DEI compliance things that are popping up at the same time around sexual harassment in the workplace. There's a few things that the diehard DEI experts won't say are compliance, but they are absolutely compliance
mm.
and in that realm. When we look at the gender pay gap reporting requirements and the naming and shaming that will come from February 27 onwards. So there's a lot going on that businesses need to be aware of, because what we could see from an employee perspective is if you're not performing, well, then expect that your employees might start walking, because we're going to know who is performing more so than ever this year. We're going to know which companies are very equitable on the pay front. We're going to know who's doing what on those the broader DEI compliance reforms that you've spoke about. So it's really in a company's best interest to remain competitive in this sense by staying up to date with the changes coming.
Well, and it's not just about employees walking. They'll actually be able to take employers to task. So the
Yeah.
psychosocial hazards, are very much around even things like microaggressions or things that we had thought, in the workplace were originally considered to be minor, and if they're actually causing people, mental harm, then it's not going to be tolerated and employers will see potentially fine. So yeah, it's quite an interesting time. So tell us a little bit about
Mm.
your learnings through capital raising and stuff. Are you enjoying the process?
I actually am. It's a funny thing when you start off as a journalist and you think this is my career, this is where I'm headed, this is I'm gonna have a show one day, I'm going to write many books, I'm gonna do all these things. You somehow along the lines, I found myself as an accidental entrepreneur, and I've loved every moment of it because I've constantly had to reinvent and think about business. And I think that the capital raise process um, has been an exciting one. Not to say it's not daunting, and not to say it's a um, you know I'm not sure of what the outcome's going to be. Let's be honest, but it's
Mm.
I'm certainly very hopeful that we've got investors out there that understand why gender equity is so darn important and how we can do something from a tech perspective. And you're just learning all the time. Your financial models change. You're more focused on your financial models. You're more focused on the people you're going to bring in, how you're going to spend. It forces you to get very acute in your business mindset, and that I've really enjoyed because I love looking at data, and I can find myself quite buried in that detail. In many ways, it's easier than dealing with people. So I've actually enjoyed that part of it, but it is nice to have a bit of an all-rounded perspective. So I'm about learning as we go along through this process, and I suppose it's something that I'd encourage other entrepreneurs, if they can, to put it out there to, and you mentioned to me earlier about crowdfunding. Like, why not? Really, why
Mm.
not have a go? Because the learnings that you get from it are a mini MBA at worst, really. At worst, you're just going to go so much further than that.
Well, and I guess just listening to Bianca, you can see why she was the winner of the CEO board category. She's got so much passion and enthusiasm and great ideas that are making a difference. Thank you so much, Bianca, for joining us today to chat about,
Thank you.
your win and what you're doing. It's really exciting work.
Thank you. It's lovely to talk to you always.
Thanks, Bianca.